I'm Samantha.
Sure.
Hello, I'm Samantha Wu, a freshman at the University of Pennsylvania, and today I have the great privilege and honor of interviewing someone who has profoundly shaped my life, Mr. Reese, my incredible teacher and mentor. And one of my favorite memories from high school is his English 9 honors class still, where his unique teaching style and constant encouragement helped spark my passion for writing for the first time. And his guidance didn't stop there. He's also been a mentor in so many areas in my life, including strengthening my faith. And I feel that I truly wouldn't be the person I am today without his unwavering support. And to give you a glimpse of Mr. Reese's incredible accomplishments, Mr. Reese is an esteemed poet whose work has been published widely. His poetry collection, Monterey, became the first self published book to rank #1 in the Asian American poetry category in May 2020. And he was a finalist in the California Writers Exchange Award. Beyond his writing, he's an extraordinary teacher, having inspired students first as a writer in residence at the Ruth Ozawa San Francisco School of the Arts, and now at Valley Christian High School in San Jose, where he was named Teacher of the Year in 2021. What truly sets Mr. Reese apart is his dedication to his students, and he never gives up on anyone. He always fosters thoughtful, inclusive discussions and constantly challenges us to grow as writers and thinkers. And it's truly an honor to have the chance to spotlight someone who has made such a profound impact on so many lives, including my own. So I've been talking long enough and probably embarrassing Mr. Reese long enough. So without further ado, let's get into our first question. And this is the question you actually asked me in our interview.
Okay.
But what are some of the things that you're passionate about?
Oh, what am I not passionate about?
That's a good way to narrow it down.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a long story in itself. It's because I was raised by a single mom and we moved around a lot. And I had to figure out because everyone else around, right, the other kids were always interested in different things. So I had to figure out how do I get good at this thing, whether I liked it or not, right? To be able to play with them, to get along, or even speak their language, right?
Mhm.
So it was a crash course in empathy. Um, I think I'm passionate about hearing people's stories. Obviously, I love learning. There's nothing more exciting than reading a book or having a great conversation and
Mhm.
thinking, oh, I thought that way too, or I didn't think about that. Um, and seeing the results of it. So it could be about writing, reading, sports. One student actually told me, he was like, we were talking about Korean dramas. And I guess the way I deconstructed it, and probably precedes the conversation we had before we started recording. So I was talking about a favorite Korean drama or within its genre. And he's like, Mr. Reese, I don't think you watch Korean dramas. I think you study them. Um, I want to see people do better. I want to see the world change, and anything that feeds into that, I'm about it. Uh,
Mm.
and I think that also, we can invert that. What I'm not passionate about, like standing still, um, it hurts me to see people hurting themselves or hurting others, um, or not reaching potential. And I think because I'm hard on myself with that too. When someone has this awesome light, they're enthusiastic about something, and they're just afraid. Or maybe someone or something has not given them permission, or they haven't seen a good model. So, poetry, reading, writing, hearing stories, sports, uh, yeah, life in general.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that like your willingness to hear other people's stories and like understand it on a deeper level like really shines through during, your conversations with people and discussions, and branches out into so many different things that you do. So, yeah. So my second question is, how did you first discover your interest in poetry?
Oh, that's deep. Um, Poetry, it sounds cliche. Poetry was always around. Uh, my first language, believe it or not, was Korean. But as much as I talk now, I was a very quiet kid. And as I was growing up, my first few years in Korea, I was being told a lot of things, and I was just listening, and I see all the cadence, and I saw the beauty of the visual language and the juxtaposition between the Korean language and then Han Chinese characters, and then with the advent of industrialization in Korean, seeing more English. I'm like, okay, what's going on? I'm really confused now. I'm really, really confused. And um, just hearing the fingerprint of everyone's stories and how they're told, some very much the same, but the tension being so different and how it's delivered. And then there's an occasional time where I don't have a great relationship or close relationship with my father. So when he did come in and out, all of a sudden here's this African American man telling stories, and he had this delivery that was just epic. And I seen him move rooms, be it our apartment when he was hosting people or in his office. Um, he had this way to narrate, and then he would listen to stand-up comedy. He would listen to rap music. He was also a DJ, so
Wow,
music
so
and
many
words were.
different genres of like storytelling coming together.
Now,
Yeah.
the crazy part, Sammy, is when I came to the US in fifth grade, is I didn't know how to read. So, um,
Surprising.
yeah, and so I was in a corner uh, of a room, just set aside, and everyone was reading one text. I had to read from scratch. And I was blessed I had awesome teachers that weren't judgmental. My peers weren't judgmental. They still played with me during recess. Um, but I had to teach myself how to read using Clifford the Big Red Dog and Dr. Seuss. And but I think
Very
the
nostalgic.
beauty, yeah, the beauty that came from that struggle was uh, hearing my voice like aloud. Because then nowadays we're taught to read silently.
Hmm.
And I think you know me from the classroom. When I read, I project, and it's a different voice, right? Um, the intonations are different, and I just see the words as really living. Uh,
Hmm.
and I think that has informed uh, my writing a lot. Then, in terms of expressing myself, because I didn't know how to read and write when I was young, I knew how to draw. That's how I express myself. So either talking, listening, or drawing. Um, so, I mean, obviously, I got along well, got into college, but when I got into college, I turned in this essay, and this professor uh, said, I need to talk to you after class. I was like, okay. I was like, she's like, yeah, I need to talk to you about your essay. So everyone left, and she's like, about this essay. I was like, I didn't cheat, I didn't plagiarize. And she's like, no, 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 I know. She's like, this is a prose poem. I was like, huh? I don't, okay, I know what poem is. I don't know what is prose, right? Like, it's like you wrote an essay that is in the form of a poem. And she's like, I don't know how you did it, but you did it. And she's like, I've never read anything like this. Um, take this to this gentleman, um, show him it. He'll know what to do with it. You don't even have to say it's from me. I was like, okay, showed it to this gentleman, and I got my first publication.
Wow. Class
Um,
essay that wasn't even intended to be a poem.
it wasn't.
Wow.
Uh, so from that point on, actually, I wanted to go to law school. And that's why I transferred to Santa Clara University because their law program. And they had a very famous person that was teaching there, Johnny Cochran, who was on the defense team for O.J. Simpson. So I went there, and everyone, while I was there, the professors were like nudging me and like, you should be a poet, you should be a creative writer. I'm like, in my Korean Asian mentality, I was saying, you should never tell someone to be to go into the arts because there's no way I'm gonna be able to make a living. But then I thought about it, I was like, they wouldn't say that if it wasn't worth the risk. Because they also said they didn't tell this to people.
It's true. They saw something.
Yeah, yeah. So that's how I got into poetry. And but it was always around, expressing myself here and there, writing snippets. I would catch myself writing like one-liners. Um, when my mom would watch Korean dramas, they'll have like this crazy Confucian, like Chinese proverb, and I'd write that down. I was like, that's so cool. And she's like, what are you
Just
doing? I'm
getting
like, that's just
inspiration from
cool.
everywhere.
I was like, yeah, that's deep. Isn't that, she was like, nerd.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing that. And kind of going off of that, do you have a favorite poem that you or another poet has written that has especially inspired you? And what is it about?
Mm, ah, so um, there's two. One is uh, the romantic in me loves Paul Laurence Dunbar. If you have not read Paul Laurence Dunbar, read him.
I haven't.
Um, there's a love poem I used to carry around in my pocket just because I thought it was so beautiful and so sweet. And it's like a spell, right? That
Mm-hmm.
words can cast. And it's called Dinah Kneading Dough.
Kind of needing dough.
Dinah
I'll have to
Kneading
check that
Dough.
out.
Yeah. So look up that poem. That was a poem I printed out and purposely carried around in my pocket. Um, and then Pablo Neruda, um, any of his poems, but I believe it's called Walking Around. It just so happens I'm tired of being a man. And I feel like that right now. So so I think anyone, if they're a responsible adult in their 30s and 40s, will tell you they want to be in by 9 p.m., right? And it's like, why go out? Why risk it all doing something ignorant? If you're paying rent or a mortgage, you're paying to
Hmm.
be here, right? Um,
Hmm.
but you're just grateful to be alive, but then the world moves on without you. And it's something about being a poet, which is being a constant observer. Everyone gets to live on with their life, but for some reason, as your duty, you're a recorder, you're an historian, and you're blessing the boats as they go by. It's like being a
So
teacher
you're
in that
like
sense.
staying in the same spot
Yes,
and just like kind of watching the world pass.
yes, yes. That's why I love
Huh.
watching you guys grow. Um, but then there are a lot of things that you can't control. And like, why is this happening? Why is this repeating? Like what's happened recently in Korea, right? With the government, with the presidency and the claim of martial law, or even with the airplane crash. And so we see these things that we can't change. Um, and, and Jesus says, you'll always have the sick and the poor with you. Uh,
Hmm.
but it's not to ignore the suffering, but to acknowledge it. And it's not that we can't feel pain. So that poem really, um, I think, gives permission, especially for men that are always macho and machismo. We're all here bound by the human condition. We all have feelings. We're all sensitive. We're all emotional. Um, to be recentered into like our conscious. Like this is not here forever. We're here. We didn't ask to be here, but what do we do with it? And what makes us happy? What makes us sad? What makes us angry? What would we like to see? And what is the easy way out and what are hard ways out?
Wow, yeah.
It's
It
okay
seems
to be
like it
tired.
delves into like both the individual experience, but like contextualizes that on a societal level. Yeah, that sounds
Yeah,
really awesome. I'll have to check out those poems.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. My next question is also relating to writing, but you've
Mhm.
helped me improve my writing in so many ways. But one thing that I and many other students still struggle with is writer's block,
Oh,
where we sit there, have no idea what to write. So I wanted to ask you, as a distinguished writer yourself, have you ever experienced writer's block? And if you have, what is the best way to overcome that?
so forgive my pride and arrogance. Like the ego in me says, there's no writer's block. Only because um, I believe there's always something to say. There's always a story to tell. And
Mhm.
perhaps uh, I would say you're allowed to have a break. So maybe that block is you need to rest.
Mm,
Uh,
yeah. Is this your mind telling me that you need a
yeah,
rest?
yeah. Or let's be honest, we have not researched enough. We count on our own memory banks, uh,
Hmm.
but our heart lies to us, our emotions lie to us. We gaslight ourselves, or there are things that are figments. So when you look at a picture in your memory, you know how this picture looked like. right? Like maybe you, your sister, your parents, and the clothes, yeah. But then a couple years later, you go back to the picture, like, I don't remember that shirt. I didn't see it that way.
Wow.
Um, so I personally I don't run out of stuff to write about, subject matter, details. But it is in those details I want to make sure. So I constantly research, and I'm not writing all the time. I'm actually loading up. And one of the cool parts about constantly researching it and even doubting yourself, like I'm my own worst skeptic, is understanding that I don't know. And what I do know, when that comes to truth, I'm like, oh, that's one of the most coolest things ever. So, um, in writing right now, my memoir, uh, I'm traveling with my mother to the North Korean border. And so we're actually coming back from my grandma's house on the North Korean border. And I remember this bus stop, and I swear by this bus stop, right? And I'm researching it. And the coolest thing happened. I found two or three images of it. There's nothing else that's written about it anymore. And uh, it no longer exists. It is now turned into a police station. But if I look at the route, this was the exact route to go to my grandma's house. This is like this bus stop is validation that um how do I explain this? So actually, after I researched this, I talked to other Korean people about this. And do you know Dr. Shim?
Hmm.
So I actually talked to Dr. Shim. He's like, oh, I didn't know that bus stop existed. And I was like, this is interesting because the only people that would know that bus stop were people that traveled to the North Korean border or in that remote rural area.
Mm.
So it's not everybody's story.
Yeah.
And what's cool is when I encounter other Koreans, like I didn't know that existed, but that's very real because we don't converse with each other. But long story short, I believe there is a block. I don't think it's for lack of imagination. I think we put too much weight, too much shoulder on ourselves to conjure that.
Hmm.
We have resources, when we have help, when we can ask other people if that's what that story was really like.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's an interesting perspective that like writer's block can just be an indicator that you need to like go out and experience more, like develop an opinion or like, learn more about the topic before you're ready to write. But yeah, it's awesome. My next question is that you've been a mentor in my life and in so many people's lives. So I'm curious to know who is a mentor who has had a great influence on your life and how have they impacted you?
Um, well, obviously my mother. She's no longer here, but I think she proved to be the greatest mentor because she pointed me to God. Uh,
Mm.
she gave me faith, and then the wisdom that she bestowed upon me, even before I committed my life to Jesus, which was to be discerning. Um, and everything that she taught me, I've never made like it's not that I've never made mistakes, but it's only bared more fruit, and I've been able to find other mentors that reflect or amplify everything that she's planted in me. So obviously she's at the cusp, but who isn't my mentor? Like seriously, and I think you know how I run the classroom. I try to facilitate, and I'm constantly learning from you all. I learn from your sister. Like it's interesting the points that you all bring up, and I'm like, they don't know that they're giving me information. like they're making, like um, every, the world, you know, there's wisdom in the world, even if they're not Christian too. Um,
Hmm.
so I'm constantly, um, you know, I'm constantly trying to learn. And so everyone I've had on my podcast, including yourself, has been my mentor.
Thank you. Yeah. Wow. And it's very interesting to hear how about like how the values that your mother like instilled in you from a young age, you see that reflected in all the people that you meet. So yeah, that's wonderful. And one of the areas of my high school career where your mentorship was transformative was Diversity Matters. Shout out. But in that club, we talk a lot about the experiences of different communities and
Mm.
the issues that they face and how they have overcome them. So, stemming from that, but from a broader scale, what do you think is the biggest issue that our nation faces today and why?
Oh, we're into this. No,
Yeah.
actually, it goes back to, were we online? Was it? I think we were, no, we were online sheltering. No, I was teaching online. Um, when you first had me on as a guest speaker.
Yeah.
So I'm honored and blessed because my narrative doesn't exist being mixed race or what we call mixed race. Um, and when we share stories, there's so many different stories. We're from all different walks of life, and we can find so much that we have in common, but we just don't talk to each other.
Mm.
I forgot who said it, but it's someone Google it. But I believe it's war is the result or the answer when language no longer works.
Mm. Yeah.
And our classroom is so diverse, but at its peak, people are just like hands up, hey, and I think there were a couple times like, hey, don't talk to that person, talk to me about it. Um, and now more than ever in this postmodern era, everyone has this platform to speak, but we don't understand the responsibility with that platform, which is the
Mhm.
consideration of an audience.
Mm.
And we're getting fed information and we don't know how to filter that information. This is what's causing more division and um, not any type of unification or reconciliation. We have factions and we have factions within factions. Even recently, um, you look at the X or Twitter Spaces, whatever you call it, within the Republican Party, you have uh, let's call it a faction. We have one faction honoring what's happening here at Silicon Valley with the H-1B visas, but then you have another population saying no, that shouldn't be allowed, and we're not having the hard convo of let's meet in person, maybe have a cup of coffee, let's go for a walk,
Yeah.
versus just ranting at each other through emotion. And we're thinking that's going to be cathartic. No, that just adds more fuel to the fire. So we're not having hard conversations. And, actually, even before we started recording, we were having a hard conversation.
Hmm.
And I think that can conquer everything. A few students came and visited this past week. And I was thinking, it's one's basically a current junior class and one's your current class, right? These two groups. And I didn't know how they're going to get along. They don't know each other. And we went for a walk and we sat down and it turned from just actually, I don't do small talk. So it didn't even start off with small talk. It started off with something deep and engaging and it turned into a life/community group. Like we went heavy, Sam.
Whoa.
We went really heavy. And I'm like, how did we get here? And basically, I deduced that we were unashamed. It's not that we didn't put on the front that we were perfect. It's crazy how deep we got immediately. And we were vulnerable and we weren't on the same picture. We were, bantering back and forth. Um, but we all had the foundation, which was, Mr. Reese does not have easy conversations, even in generations apart.
Yeah, we have that expectation already.
Yeah, yeah. And so even with generations apart, we just got in and we chopped it up for a few hours, which was crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So w- maybe is it semantics? Is it not being empathetic and just talking with each other? Because I understand the frustrations on both sides, which is, when I came to the US, I lived in a small town in Missouri, and they had a different standard of benchmarks of classes. We're not going to have the level of math classes that Valley offers. In fact, we feed into the military industrial complex where I live. So when you graduate, most likely you're going to join the military, you're going to work at a gas station. My friend's sister was the valedictorian, and she ended up working at the Waffle House because she couldn't afford to go to college. Right? What a loss of intellectual talent.
Yeah.
And just because someone does manual labor does not mean that they're not brilliant, that they don't have something to offer, but this is how they feel. This is
Hmm.
how people feel who don't have opportunity, who don't have college degrees, who don't have the infrastructure built out versus Silicon Valley where we're hyper competitive, and technology grows exponentially. And then also our view is, can you train someone in the Midwest or South that doesn't have college education? Can you give them a year or 2 years and train them to code on the level that we're at? Well, you probably can't.
I'm sure that's possible. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, we're not having this dialogue of onboarding and training and all these other things. We become concentrated again in comfort, right? It's
Hmm.
very cultish behavior,
Hmm.
instead of having dialogue, which is no. Um, well, here's the common denominator. We're all going to come to this table. We're not going to hurt each other. We're going to listen to each other. I remember the story of this politician. I don't know his name, and the way he got elected was quite brilliant. He just sat there, and everyone was shouting, and he was like, "Let's take your question one question at a time." And he never gave a speech.
Yeah, he just directly addressed what people wanted to know.
He
So,
just listened. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, but going back to the postmodern era, but we have everything projecting onto us, and we move so fast, that we don't
Hmm.
know that this is a worldview, right? A worldview is being pressed onto us, um, and we don't know how to entertain it. We don't know how to discipline it. We don't know how to see it as a resource, right? Instead, it's using us as a resource.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, um, obviously, the correct answer is Jesus, but it's always going to be just no. Um, but if you look at in the Bible too, that was the whole thing was what is the real problem? Or is it you wanting to stay in your comfort? Do you really want to solve this?
Hmm.
And having understanding, we talked about it before the podcast too, which was there's a world that doesn't know anything that you believe. And you have to understand that. If you understand that, you forgive them. You can't judge them. It's not your place to judge them. And we don't have that maturity and that wisdom to say, I don't know, or that empathy and sympathy. I don't know what you're going through.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting how, like, as you mentioned, even with so many like forms of communication that we have nowadays, and it's so easy for people to share their perspectives and stories, it seems like we're still not having these conversations and we're getting more and more polarized rather than like, coming together. And it's also interesting how, like, even though we're able to see all different sides of the story, we're still having these massive like wars around the world. Like you would think that that would get better over time, but seems like it has not.
It
But
takes
yeah.
hard, yeah, yeah. It takes hard work to be human. And I'm
Hmm.
honored. Well, I'm honored by you. I'm honored by your sister. I'm honored by your mother. The reason I say that is you got to know me as a person. But as we know, and you can take this as celebrities or politicians, but this is the microcosm of it. Um, there's gossip about me, there's lore about me, and people buy into that lore. And they don't know me as a human being. They don't know me as a son that lost his mother, as an orphan, right? As a poet. They just know me as this person who is a grade butcher, supposedly, supposedly, supposedly. Um, and I've actually had a parent of a former student message me directly and ask me for coffee. And she actually apologized because she bit into those rumors, but she's glad that she kept her student in my class. Um, and but you could see the guilt and adding on to the echo chamber.
Mm.
Um, so if this is happening with little old me, who's just an English teacher, um, how are we approaching this much stimuli, with social media, right?
Mhm. It all becomes just like first glance, surface level, not really actually getting to know the person for the authentic person that they are. Yeah.
Versus Jesus when he comes, and this is how I try to, if I have the opportunity to get to know each student or listen to your stories, you as an individual, you as your own world, you as your own universe, right? When Jesus goes to every single person, he contextualizes every person's being.
Mm. Yeah, that's true. That's something we think about much. Yeah, well, thank you. My next question is, how does faith play a role in your life? And what was a time that you heard God's voice or experienced his power?
Oh, faith is everything in my life. I would not be here if it wasn't for faith. Now, do I have great amount of faith? It goes up and down.
Hmm.
I get caught up, excuse me, I get caught up in my own understanding. I get caught up in whatever rewards or awards that I get because I'm like, oh, I hit this benchmark. I did this, not always being sober to the fact that God guided those steps. But that's,
Hmm.
it's me against the world in that sense, and that's my ego. Um, but this mustard seed of faith, like literally that's what it was. And it was built over the years. But, as I shared with you, when I grew up in Korea, um, I was bombarded with language. And because I wasn't fluent in English or Korean, I was just listening. I almost felt imprisoned by my conscience. And I spent a lot of the time in the countryside in rice paddies by myself. Um, what a way to have an existential crisis, right? Uh, who am I? Why am I here? And where do I go from now? Um, and my earliest memories, which you'll see in my memoir, are of graves. And I knew that there was an end to this. And and I think too, at the same time, people who quote unquote say they don't have faith, they do have faith, um, in the sense that they have faith in themselves and this is all they have, and that's why they're coping and they're showering themselves with worldly things and materialism, which I understand, right?
Because if you put your faith in yourself, where
Yeah.
else are you going to invest all that?
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
you don't know what comes after this. There is no faith in what
Mm.
comes after this. So I had talks with God very early on. What was right, what was wrong, and getting convicted, figuring out what were laws, what made good, what made bad,
Mm.
um, and who to listen to, who not to listen to. And like I said before, because my mom instilled in me and modeled for me certain ways of believing or even taking a chance in understanding, oh, this person is a good person. This person is not so good person. Like, Mom, how did you figure that? And she's like, watch, see. Um, and having faith in my mom being right led to other things. Now, when I came to the US, um, I heard a message and it spoke and it just brought peace to my heart. And so I became Christian then, and everything was going perfect. Academics, I was like the cream of the crop. I was winning all these awards, yada, yada, yada. I was like a Renaissance man at seventh grade. Um, but then, faith isn't faith until it's tested. So I had everything I wanted. So it was happiness, but it wasn't meaning. And I gave up real quick.
Hmm.
The devil tested me, evil tested me, suffering tested me, and I gave up really quick. I gave into, and that's why I'm saying that I don't judge anyone that isn't of the faith and they're living for it now because it's just complete fear of the unknown. And so you only want what's immediately known to you right here in front of you.
Hmm.
So I hung out with the wrong crowd and I was happy in the sense that I was dumbing down my senses, right? I was doing things that weren't good for my body or my mind or my spirit. Um, but later on I became miserable. And then it was interesting. So it was like I prayed, but I was back to my conscious. I was like back to my old 8, 9-year-old self walking through the rice paddies. I was like, even though I'm at this party, I left this party. I'm like, in my head, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? And it was one of the scariest thoughts. It was like I had more fear than I ever had in my life. And I wanted the confidence that I had when I gave my life to God, when I was walking in those rice fields. So I thought, when was the last time I was happy? I was like, because this is not it. Even though I had everything that I wanted in regards to my senses,
Hmm.
I wasn't happy. So I got on my knees and I just prayed and I just prayed. I didn't immediately go back to God or church. In fact, I started studying other religions. Um, and something said, well, as I had the Bible that was given to me after I got baptized. Never read it, just read it whenever occasionally when we had, Bible study when I was a kid, right? Or when in middle school.
Hmm.
So I read Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, read Buddhist manuscripts, um, read the Torah, read uh, parts of the Quran. Now, I didn't do my due diligence and read everything from beginning to end, except for Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, because I was just familiar with Taoism because of Korea,
Mm.
that background. I said, I'm going to survey every faith, but let me, something moved my heart, said, I need to give this a fresh shot. And the Bible that was given to me after my baptism, I was like, I'm going to read this from beginning to end. And then I'll make a decision. And I started reading it. Nothing was happening. And slowly and surely, um, I felt some of these things were true. And I was like, no other text did I read where uh, the quote unquote characters, the people in there, were not good people, right? This wasn't like a positive spin, just like, oh, but that makes me feel like, oh, it's okay for me not to be perfect. Um, or there are things not right, and this is what it looks like, or this is what happens. And then I definitely, when I got to Proverbs, I'm like, oh, this is true. This
Yeah.
is amazing. Uh, and I finished the book and I just had great peace. I was like, I don't think I need to look anywhere else. But on the same premise of when I came back to the faith, I'm going to have that same premise and scrutinize my faith as much every single day.
Yeah, that's a
And
healthy mindset.
I only become more grateful to God. Um,
Hmm.
because any type of misstep would not lead me to be in front of Sammy. Could not imagine the life that I lived in high school to be able to be a teacher or hear about your stories, doing missions work. I mean, that is for me, that's the miracle. That's a miracle. That's no offense to Peter walking on water or anything. So I'm just like, from someone who should not, I would say for myself, who should not be alive, I get to see um, just beautiful things happening, people succeeding. And
Yeah.
faith has brought me here.
Wow. So like in that way, faith kind of brought you to like a greater purpose and like meaning in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing. And it's really interesting how like God uses those like moments, very low moments to reflect to us, like, there's something very large that's missing in our life. And it's very cool to hear about how you were exploring different faiths and how you came back to Christianity. So,
Yeah. Well, like leaning on the own understanding parts, like you look at Abraham when he was going and he kept lying and doing things in front of Pharaoh, um, and he couldn't just trust in a promise that God is just going to bless him.
mhm.
So in the same way, when I graduated high school, I had no plans to go to college. I graduated high school, bottom 30 percentile. I broke my mother's heart. My dad just wanted me to go to the military. Um, and when my mom passed away, she said, I didn't know that you were this smart. I wish I would have spent money and sent you to tutoring. And in my heart, I was like, Mom, there was no tutoring in Missouri. This is not California. Right? And we just didn't have those circumstances. But through, unfortunately, these trials and tribulations, other people got to be blessed. I ended up becoming a college counselor for UC Berkeley. And I have a closet full of hoodies of students that were, got to go to, they got to go to a university that probably my mom would have dreamed that I could have went to. So I'm living vicariously through you guys. Who gets to say that they have a hoodie from Oxford, Penn, Art Center, Yale, yada yada yada, right?
Wow. Yeah,
Let's not be
absolutely.
hard on ourselves.
Wow, absolutely. Yeah. And you've made an impact in so many people's lives, and it's wonderful to hear about it. Um, yeah, this next question may be especially relevant for students in high school or college
Mm.
like me who are trying to discover what they want to do in the future. Kind of what you've mentioned, but how do you know what God's calling is for your life?
So hopefully, I think one of the reasons I project in class with so much passion and urgency is because I don't want y'all to reinvent the wheel as I had, right? As I had to do. Uh, so in regards to finding your calling, and doing the work that will sustain you, uh, I think there's a number of ways to go about it. But first and foremost, listen. Um, I didn't expect to be a writer, right? But everyone kept saying, "You ought to be a writer. You ought to be a writer." I'm like, I'm not going to make any money. How am I going to survive in Silicon Valley? Oh, but you should still do it. I mean, it literally felt like I call it the Jonah complex. Literally, people were kicking me off the boat. Like, look, if you don't do this, we're throwing you off the boat. And there are other things that happened. Um, so when I was at Santa Clara, like I said, I had a professor that told me that helped me. I even actually had a professor, shout out to Rebecca Black, who told me I need to apply to this fellowship. I didn't listen. She says, I believe in you. I didn't listen. I applied years later and I got in, which was a blessing. But the unfortunate part of me getting in later was I actually had one of my favorite poets, Clifton, who I want to work with. And I finally got to work with her. If I would have listened to my professor in the very beginning, I would have got to work with her right away or meet her right away. But now, when it finally came down to this opportunity to do it, to meet her, she passed away right before the fellowship. And I was like, ah, this is why I always say, listen to your elders. Um, your friends, your family members may see you a little bit more objectively. So take that into consideration. Also consider what comes easy for you. Not to flex or anything, but I enjoy writing. It comes easy. It's weird that I don't like doing it in a sense that the reason I don't like doing it because I know how much bandwidth it's going to take and time flies like this. Maybe it's too fun. Maybe it's too indulgent.
Yeah, time
Um,
flies when you're having fun.
so that's why I say I hate it. I don't hate writing, but I hate it. And uh, yeah, find what comes easy for you. So I didn't expect to be a teacher. So I've been a college counselor for years. That's what I did was be a college counselor. I worked in admissions also. And my last stint, I actually worked as an administrator for a university. So I did a poetry reading at Foothill College because they needed a poet for Black History Month. And word of mouth, as I was a college counselor, I was helping students, and word of mouth, obviously being like your poetry. Someone says, "Oh, this person is a poet. You should get him." So through 2 degrees of separation, someone pulls me aside. Hey, would you do a reading? I did the reading, um, and this professor at Foothill was like, "How'd you do that? How'd I do what?" It's like our students were engaged. I was like, "He's like, you're gonna teach here." I was like, "Ah, yeah," but it just so happens that I had the degrees to line up, and I got my first job as a professor there at Foothill, and that was a wonderful experience. And I kept teaching part time. And then there was no full-time positions open. And I was like, is teaching really for me? Is it, should I do this? I don't have a teaching credential. And then opening happened at this very privileged middle school. And I said, you know what? Let's figure out what age group it is if I'm meant to be a teacher. And they hired me, and it was a wonderful experience. Something happened there, and I ended up at Valley. But even before that, when I was working as a college counselor, this is before your time. So Obama just got elected, and we had the mortgage crisis. And my mentor, um, who was the head of admissions of the art college, was like, Robert, things are not going to look good for universities. So before they start raising tuition, I want you to go to grad school, study what you want to study. You're reading poems on the side. No one does that. Go get a master's in poetry. And I'm like, bruh. And he was right. He sent I applied to all my grad schools. The blessing was I got into every single one of them, but a flex, right? It's redemption.
Not surprised.
Yeah. Uh and I was moved to go SF State, and that's a story for another time. And the blessing was I basically got my tuition paid for, and I won a couple of fellowships, and they basically paid me to go there. So I got a free master's degree. So even when I wasn't serious about poetry, other people, God was placing messengers, mediators to push me and guide me along the way. So sometimes when you get hit, you're being humbled for a reason, and you want to listen to that. Um, and maybe sabotage myself because who carries around books of poetry during their work, right? What am I signaling to my bosses? I'd rather be somewhere else, you know? Um, no, and then just trusting God. And on a side note for academics, what you want to do, what I learned at UC Berkeley as a college counselor there, which is be honest, be fair to yourself. So the beautiful part about learning in the United States is our liberal arts education. So your GE courses are meant to humble you and also is to give, um, validation to the accreditation of the institution. But for you to take this class here and there to figure out, it's like a survey for you to figure out what really is your strength. Because you can always change your major too. So what is it that you really want to do? What is it that you're good at? And if, without the survey of courses, also you wouldn't be a well-rounded person. If you go to study in Asia or in Europe, once you pick psychology or biology, you only study that. You're not taking an econ course. You're not taking a whatever other course to humble you. Because later on, when you go into the work world, you'll meet like an accountant, and because you take one accounting class, you're like, oh, I can't do that. But if you go to Europe, you meet someone of a different field, they're a little bit more snooty. Like, you're an engineer, I could have done that, right? So, um, yeah, so survey, do a lot, but be honest with yourself and listen to other people.
Yeah. Wow, that's great advice. Yeah, and it's really cool how like you can like know your passion and God can still like place people to point you in the right direction. So, yeah. The next few questions are more abstract questions, but what is the distinction between pride and confidence?
Ooh, ouch. So first and foremost, I'm not without pride and arrogance for sure. Um,
Like, me too.
um, at the same time, pride and arrogance is, taking for granted what's been given to you.
Mm.
Understand that wasn't yours to begin with. But you're saying that you did this, you made this, and this was all you. And you deserve more, and you feel entitled. And you feel, or the fruit of it, or the lack of fruit, or the rotten from a fruit of it is you put down others. You make others feel like an other. Uh, Now with confidence, you need it though too. And so people mistake confidence as pride and arrogance. Confidence, if you break down the word, is con fide, which means with faith, with loyalty. You're doing these things, you know you're good at it because you've achieved something with this before. You don't advance in math um, in terms of different levels if you haven't mastered a previous level. Now, are you supposed to be anxious every time you go, oh, I don't know, I'm so humble, I can't do this. It's not, no, like you've done this before. You know this functions this way. You know this is true. And I think people mistake pride for confidence, confidence for pride in situations where they haven't seen anything happen for themselves. I tell people, especially in a field um, where other people haven't done it before. You see it with a lot of artists and celebrities, or even second gen um, students. What happens is for y'all, sometimes your parents live vicariously through y'all, but they've never done what you've done, and they push you to do things that they themselves could not do. Um, and so, our attitude towards that audience is, who are you to tell me how to live and how to do this when you've never done this before?
Mhm.
I've done that with my mother. And this is the danger of becoming more educated, at least for myself, because my mom unfortunately wasn't able to receive a middle school education. Uh, as I got as I got my bachelor's degree and I started earning money and paying rent and all these other things. And by the way, my mother continued to live with me. Um, we couldn't communicate because language wise, I was advancing in language,
Mm.
right? We were speaking different languages, or that was my excuse, or that's the rift that I put between us, right? Or you don't know my world, I don't know your world, whatever. So even when I got my master's degree, the gap only widened.
Mm.
And, we would get into disputes when it wasn't really a dispute. It was just really, let's just spend time with each other, right? But my thing was, oh, I need to do something else. You don't understand where I'm coming from. And she's like, um, she was heartbroken by that I could make her, like, I othered her like that. And long story short, after she passed, I went through a box of her things. And while I was working, she actually enrolled herself into night school trying to learn English.
Wow.
Um, See, that's all pride and arrogance that caused that big of a rift. Now, the last month that we were together, I was her caretaker, her caregiver.
Hmm.
And I don't practice speaking in tongues. However, I saw this miracle, which was that last month. I didn't notice it until she passed away. My mother only spoke in English and I only spoke in Korean because
Wow.
we were so desperate to communicate with each other and to not let one word or thought to be misunderstood and to go missing,
Yeah.
right? Uh, but confidence, yeah, with faith, you know how far you've come. Don't let anyone else take that away from you. And you see a lot of people that don't have confidence, unfortunately, especially with those that cheat and cut corners. When you cheat, you actually admit that you're subpar. And the thing in educational psychology, what we call cemented learning, you have to learn this before you go to the next,
Hmm.
and that's where a lot of people, when they, enter into academia or in the professional world, they come across with imposter syndrome. The confidence that they had early on when they were skating through, that was confidence in what they can get away with, not in actual merit. But it's tough though too because the more brilliant you are, um, because you're constantly learning and relearning, you're learning that you don't know everything. You're actually already humble and humiliated, so it's easy for people to eat at your confidence also. And I think that's what hurts. And this is where You can't let people get to you, but how do you reset that? Well, um, you find other people that are like-minded or who have a heart to listen or who are different from you, right? What gives me confidence is hanging out with people who are in STEM. Like, I didn't know that, that's possible, right? Um, so yeah, confidence is just having faith in yourself, or having faith in general and knowing how far you've come. Remember, you just didn't magically get here. But pride and arrogance, yeah, it's
It's like you forget, all the people that have contributed
yeah,
to you being here.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting how you kind of tie confidence with humility in a sense. Um, yeah.
And I said,
Kind of
don't
on
forget.
that note, and I think you've already talked about this, but what is humility?
Oh, humility. Knowing that, yeah, you said it, you didn't come here by yourself. I always say you're standing on the shoulders of giants. You're always coming here from a previous generation too. I think that's why, going back to passion, I actually love history. Um, as much as an enigma as my existence is being mixed, I just didn't randomly show up here. Uh, and it's so cool when you trace back your history. I'm like, oh, this is why this way is this way. I found out so much about my past. And I'm like, this makes sense, but this also lets you know that you have much more responsibility to this. Um, you know, Part of being humble is being humiliated. And people who are humble never say that they're humble. They exude it. Um, just like in our search for meaning and our search for love, when we're young, we're immature, we're narcissistic. We do so much to get validated for love, right? When we become more mature, we give love, if that makes sense. But sometimes we give too much love, and that's still an immature thing because we don't have boundaries, because we still want validation in giving love. Uh,
Mhm.
but I believe the final stage is just exuding love. And so people who are humble, again, it might be misread that they might be arrogant or cocky, but they're just confident, they're just moving forward. But we're not part of that world, part of that space, because we don't see the work that it took for them to get there. Um, And also, if you ask someone to explain everything that they learned, so if I ask you in your favorite bio class, right? If I told you right now, I need you to tell me everything that you learned over the term right now, and break it down to me so I can understand. You'd be like, Mr. Reese, you've lost your mind. I just know that I'm here, And I
Mhm.
think that goes for, I believe, parents. Parents are the most humble, the most humiliated. It's not easy being a parent. Um, they're here. They can, if you have both parents in your life, which I didn't. That's why kudos to my mom for sticking with me. Which is, if your parents are still with you, that means they didn't give up on you. And yeah, they might toot their own horn, but they're still humble because, from an investment point of view, they're at a loss. They're at a financial loss. Um, but they're still doing it. And despite maybe they don't speak the language that we get scripted by worldview or Disney, like, oh, you have to say I love you. No, no. Did you eat? We go back to that. Did you eat? Even especially after you fought, you know,
Yeah,
they're
it's like
being
an
humble.
expression that they still care about you.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
and that's you also being humble, being receptive to that. Okay, mom still loves me, dad still loves me. Okay, I got it. Versus being rebellious and saying, no, I know better, right? They're not being humble. I'm humble. Then you're not humble.
Yeah. No, I think it definitely seems like a very complex thing. Lots of wisdom bombs that you've dropped. But yeah, it's interesting how like humility is kind of correlated with like maturity and how like Jesus says it's like dying to yourself, dying to your own ego and pride and all that. But yeah.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up too, because here's the thing with Jesus is like, he's humble his whole life. When he's a little kid in the temple, he's like, hey, what are you doing? And he's like, bro, I'm in my father's house. That might come off as arrogant,
That's true.
But if you knew what he was gonna do later on, you're like, bro, he needed this time here.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. My next question is, how does one overcome regret?
Oh, that's tough. After my mom passed, experiencing grief, um, you know, I believe depression is real. And I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist. But my encounters with depression come from regret. I wish this could have happened. I wish this would have happened. I didn't do this. I couldn't have done this. Why didn't I do this?
Hmm.
Uh, um, and my encounter with that is very real. And I encourage people just to, as we talked about before, just to be honest that that pain is real.
Hmm.
Because the more we repress it, the more that's going to be regret, right? That adds on to the regret. And if you've been blessed to have faith, um, then you know this is not the end because there's more going forward. I think for those that don't have faith, this is where for those who have faith have to model faith and not being or not modeling, being as easily triggered or materialistic or coping in the same ways. And we ought to be more disciplined to show people that there is more.
Hmm.
There is regret. That pain is going to be real. Like the trauma is real. Um, but also, why does it hit you? And so, um, I look, I look at emotional pain as a blessing in the sense that if I feel this pain, that means I'm still alive. It also means I have a heart because I think there's a couple times um, where I was very numb to myself in high school, where I was not a good person, and I had no emotions. And then even after my mom passed, I actually went through shock. I think right after she passed, the nurse was shaking me because I didn't breathe for 2 minutes. And then for a while, I think I didn't cry for like a month and a half. And I'm like, am I a sociopath? Because I'm not crying. But there's other reasons behind that, which my friend noted. Because I was I was helping everyone else that was grieving my mother. I couldn't grieve my mother because I had to be the strong person, right? I was her son, but I was acting like her husband or her brother, right? In that sense. And I've been her caregiver for so long. So I had regret not being able to be her son. When my mom got diagnosed, I didn't cry in front of her one time. Should I have cried? Well, I didn't want her to feel sad, right?
Hmm.
Um, but the thing about grief is, and learning that I have emotions was also so beautiful, um, because that means that my mother had that much of an impact on my life. Because in this society where it's out of sight, out of mind, right? That's why, you heard me talking class. You guys stay in touch with each other, send each other memes or whatever it is. You guys are across the country, whatever. Just let people know that they still exist.
Hmm.
Um, my mom is constantly on my mind. I was like, wow, but physically, she cannot do anything for me. Financially, she cannot do anything for me. And in this world, it's almost like we only care about things that we can tangibly get something from, that we can leverage. But how
Hmm.
wonderful that this soul, this existence still affects me. And that is I, I, one of the highest forms or expressions of agape, is this is unconditional love. Like grief is a high form of love because that person cannot do anything for you. Now,
Mm.
even biblically speaking, how wonderful is it and how crazy is it that 2,000 years ago, after Jesus passed away, we are still influenced. So, what there's a distinction in rhetoric, which is there's persuasion and then there's influence. Persuasion is I'm going to put effort to convince you to think this way. Influence is I'm going to leave. You're going
Mm.
to go out into your world and you're still going to think about the impact that I had on you or the words I said. We misuse influencers, but I mean, right? Because those influencers on social media, they don't really exist. They're not really in front of you, but they still, right? After they recorded. But you look at Jesus after he's passed and we do the Lord's Supper. Do this in remembrance of me. Like, oh, this is still changing hearts. This is still changing lives. We're still honoring the cross. We're still honoring that empty tomb. That's that's love because we do not have to do it. In a forgive me, God, in a worldly sense, Jesus don't put money in my pocket, even though he does. I believe in God's providence, but
Uh-huh.
but you know what I'm trying to say, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
so the thing with regret is you can't just tell someone just move forward, move on with it. No, 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 no. Honor it actually.
Mm.
Right. And we talked about sabotaging before. It's like, what are we really saying? What are we really going through? You know, or even writer's block. What do we really need a break from? Or, yeah, or what is it that, well, we actually value this. This is really important.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's an interesting perspective of like viewing these difficult emotions that you have, like regret and grief, as a way to like honor the experiences or people that have passed. And yeah, wow. And my last question is, if you could put out a message to the entire world, what would your message be about?
Ooh, that was heavy. That came out.
Yeah, I
No,
guess.
no, you're good. You're good. That was my fault. I set myself up for that. So it's all too easy to say love, because we all different have different notions of love, and
Mhm.
our own notions, our own understanding are perverted. And we're tasked to love one another um, as we love ourselves. But what if we don't know how to love ourselves? So as we talked about be, previous before the recording too, it's just like to be sober minded. I would
Mhm.
say think.
Mhm.
People don't want to think. Nowadays, people we we put things in a ranking, but why do we like these things? I think I encourage you all before you go accept your college acceptance, go visit those campuses. Um, why are we like this? Why are we divided? Why aren't we talking? Uh, put into work to think. So we're so quick to criticize. Oh, that's so basic. That's so mid. Why is it mid? Why is it low? Like, where are the strengths and weaknesses?
Mhm.
Um, to and when you think, um, you'll stop being judgmental. And when you think, you'll learn that that other person sitting across from you or sitting beside you has a name. So that's the other thing is I've met people in Missouri that didn't like black people. But to be honest, at the same time, I was the first black person they've ever met in person. Everything, all the information got was from media. Yeah, they still said some uncouth things, but they never said it around me, right? Because they knew me by my name. Once you know me by my name, you better not call me a label. But at the same time, to be honest, we're scared because once we start caring, we have to be responsible,
Mhm.
right? And we don't want to be responsible for other people, right? Um, we're responsible for what we become in relation to. So if we think, we start understanding that we're related to each other. right? Just like we were talking about earlier, if we think, yeah, oh, these people don't believe in God. Oh, but let's look at their perspective. Let's honor them, and then your heart breaks. Um, so before, everyone's love. Yeah, we're here to love for sure. We are here to love. But we're here to think too. You go back to Adam and Eve. If Adam just was thinking, I don't think that's what God said. I don't think that's what God meant. I think that Eve is supposed to be my helper and not supposed to be like influencing, or even myself should have a healthy debate. Like,
Yeah.
um, we don't do that. Um, and I think, well, it's easier for me to say because my whole life has been ridden with conflict. I couldn't run away from conflict. My existence itself is conflict for Korean people. Um, so I had to think again, how do I honor my own existence? How do I bring honor to my family? Um, and why do other people think this way of me? And how do they think of my family? And how do I remedy that?
Wow. Yeah.
All right, Sammy, I think you're out of time.
No, no, no. Actually,
No?
the things at once, so I'm good.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Wow, so many things to think about. Thank you so much for sharing all that. Um, and yeah, hope you enjoyed this episode of the
Thank
podcast.
you, everyone. Thank you so much, Sammy.